talk with your team, even personally, and make those connections and make sure they feel present, because their loyalty will deepen, their commitment to you will deepen, and their confidence will deepen.
Yeah.
And so in a sense, you're scaling your company when you're the most present as a leader. And I just think it's underrated, not in the way we think about it, but in the way we act on it.
You're listening to Home Care Hindsight, the podcast where we talk with home care leaders about the big mistakes they've made and the even bigger lessons they've learned along the way. I'm David Knack, head of sales here at Zengage, and I've built a career on the idea that we learn a whole lot more from our mistakes than from our successes, which is great because I've made a lot of mistakes. I've gotten to know some of the leaders in this industry who've built amazing businesses and are super well respected. So I thought it'd be fun, instead of asking them about the great things they've accomplished, to have them tell the story of one of the biggest mistakes that they've made and how that mistake changed their thinking and the way they run their business. Welcome back to another episode of Home Care Hindsight, brought to you by Zengage, the leading caregiver engagement platform. I'm joined this week by a titan of the industry. That's how you're always introduced, right, Aaron? Aaron Marcum. Aaron, welcome to the show.
It's so good to be here, David. Appreciate you having me on.
How would you introduce yourself for people who aren't familiar with you?
I've been in the home care space for 24 years. 24 years. Agency owner 2 times over, founder of Activated Insights, I guess Home Care Pulse, that later on became Activated Insights. But really and truly, I mean, and this may sound a little bit trite or whatever, but I'm a proud father of 6 kids. I love being introduced as when my kids are, or when I'm introduced as their dad, right? I'm proud of what they're doing when I'm introduced that way. But anyway, I been around a long time, been in positive psychology. I have a master's degree in positive psychology, but with the desire to make a huge impact in the home care space, right? And continued impact. So that's the goal. And I however you want to introduce me, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Recently, you've launched Breakaway 365, which kind of came out of the book Entre Thrive. And so tell a little bit about like the founding of Breakaway 365 and what that's all about.
Yeah, so I mean that's really a culmination of so many different things, and I guess part of the introduction is I'm a best-selling author. I wrote that book On to Thrive, which really launched me into this coaching program, Breakaway 365. And breakaway it's a term, it's a cycling term. It's one of my hobbies that usually when I talk about bore people to death about, but I love the analogies of cycling, and breakaway is one of those to where we really truly help people break away from where they're at to where they want to be. And my story in getting there is just, again, 24 years of being an entrepreneur, being burned out. 2015, I hit a wall. I was scaling Home Care Pulse, but I was burned out. Had become so obsessively passionate about what I was doing that I forgot about myself and investing in myself. And so 2016 was I just flipped the switch, changed how I was doing things, and that burnout led me to the positive psychology field, which later on I studied under Martin Seligman, the father of positive psychology, which was a transformational experience for me as an entrepreneur, as a team member, especially as a father, a husband, and so forth, which led to the book, which led to the Breakaway program. However, I've been coaching. So when I exited Home Care Pulse in 2020, officially, and we saw that exponential growth, 2016 to 2020 was like crazy growth for us because I changed. And then I changed the way I led. I really started delegating, understanding the art of delegation. And then 2020 exited, and then continued to coach some of the top brands in the home care space. And so I never left. A lot of people thought that when I exited in 2020 that, Aaron's back, and they're seeing this breakaway program. I never left. I actually became a home care owner. I invested in a home care company out in North Carolina, Golden Harmony, and no longer involved there, but we saw exponential growth there, and I continue to coach some of the top brands, franchise brands in the space, and so continue to be involved. But now we've created a framework a breakaway. The Breakaway 365 is based on a real science-backed framework that I'm pretty proud of, that is making transformational changes in the members that use our program. So that's it
That's
in a
great.
nutshell.
Well, and that kind of leads me to the next piece of this, which is where I ask, what kind of person are you? And so you kind of alluded to this a little bit, but like, why positive psychology of all the things you could have done with your time, after you exited Home Care Pulse and all that?
Yeah, in 2017, someone gave me the book The Happiness Advantage by
Yeah,
Sean Acor, and that was my first introduction to positive psychology. And I was blown away by its approach, because most psychology is reactive
sure.
and based upon problems people already have. Positive psychology is the proactive side of psychology, and really, to me, foundational to creating real positive workplace cultures. And so when you think about the turnover issue in the home care industry, I saw positive psychology even back in 2017 as the answer to overcoming that. And so, yeah, pretty awesome. As far as like just foundational in creating just a more vibrant workplace, and not just a positive workplace. Like, positive psychology is not the science of happiness.
Right,
It's really the science behind why some people thrive and why some people don't,
right.
and being able to build cultures that do thrive regardless of where they're at in their journey in life or whatever. So
Yeah. Are there any other kind of like books, resources that are real like lay friendly that you'd recommend to listeners of this show?
yeah, Martin Seligman, he wrote the book Flourish. Pretty easy read. That's been around for quite a few years. Again, Happiness Advantage is fairly easy read. Great audiobook. If you listen to that. I love other books that tie to positive psychology. The Good Life came out
Hmm.
last year. Great book. There's several. I mean, if you really want to get into it, I mean, there's books on character strengths by Chris Peterson and Martin Seligman. That thing's about this thick, but it's not an
Sure.
easy read. And frankly, use AI,
Yeah.
right? Is that you can literally type in to ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, any of those AI tools, and find out how positive psychology applies to the home care space and
Yeah.
what concepts you could be utilizing in that. And you'll find some really great gems.
Okay, great. Well, you're here because you were crazy enough to start not just one but to two home care agencies, as well
I
as
started one and then I invested in another, so I don't
oh,
want to.
I don't know if that's better or worse. It's unclear to me.
I started harder. I'll tell you that right now, is that when you invest in somebody who's already started, who's an exceptional leader like
Yeah.
Jen is, it was a great situation that way, and being able to apply a lot of the principles we have in our program, we of course applied there. So
Well, very good. All big wins. We're not here to talk about the wins, though. Instead, bring people on this show to talk about the big mistake that they made and the way it changed the way that they think about their business. So, Aaron, what's your big mistake?
I've made many big mistakes. This one in particular is maybe the most shiniest one that delayed our growth at Home Care Pulse several years. And I actually learned this mistake. I guess the biggest mistake is I didn't learn from it the first time when I had my home care business. So rewind, I guess, back to 2002 to 2007, 8, when I had my first home care business, is I had this desire to control the outcomes in my
Mm.
business in
Mhm.
such a way to where I didn't delegate. I didn't bring on the right team members. I burned out in those first few years as a home care agency owner. I did figure some things out there, and made some amazing changes, and really began scaling from about 2004 to about 2007. And that's when I exited. And 2009 is when I exited. But we had this exponential growth there because I did figure some things out and brought in the right people. And we hear this: bring in right people, right seats. EOS talks about this. But what I learned is that about myself is that I like to control the outcomes. And because of that, I was so obsessed with that, frankly, is that it held me back from trusting people and putting
Mm,
my confidence in people.
mm,
And you thought I would have learned that as I started Home Care Pulse, and I became so obsessed with Home Care Pulse and the outcomes. I tell the story about being under my desk in 2010, building the first ever benchmarking study by myself. Like, it was the most insane. Like, I don't even want to ever relive that. No one could pay me no amount of money to relive that experience. And I was this close. I tell the story about how close I was to giving up and calling the Home Care Association of America. Back then it was the National Private Duty Association, and saying, I'm done. I'm not
yeah.
doing this study for, they were our partner in the study. And it took me a while. It wasn't until 2012 I went on this 8-month journey of finding my right hand, my COO at Home Care Pulse. And I finally found him, Eric Matson, who eventually took over the company when I exited. And it was then that we started turning corners. It was really 2015, 2016 when we really figured out our superpowers and our roles and responsibilities. Me, visionary, him as the COO. He always calls it the integrator. But we really separated that. And then I became, it was like a 180 for me,
Yeah.
is I became such a master delegator from about 2015 on. 2016 especially is when I really leaned into that.
Yeah.
And it changed the way I did business to where I could go on a bike ride for 3 hours and not worry about what was going on. Before I stepped down as CEO, 2 years later, in 2016, 2 years after we really started making these changes, 2018 into 2018, I stepped down as CEO. And it was after I took a 8-week sabbatical and my business grew. No one called me. I didn't call them.
Mm,
And I was like, I was just maybe getting in the way. I don't know. But I wanted to do some things. I wanted to coach. I started my coaching practice in 2018, really. And that was because I figured out how to build a self-multiplying business. And,
mm,
but okay, so the mistake is I waited way too long, like
yeah.
in both businesses, that I think Home Care Pulse would have been so much further along if I had not gotten in the way.
Yeah.
And so,
You've seen this from the home care owner side of things. You've seen this from the like vendor in the marketplace side of things. How does somebody know when it's time to find that second person? You know, when it's really time to lean into creating this kind of self multiplying business? Because I have to imagine, like, if you do that too soon, like, you know, you don't understand the business well enough to really be able to manage and hold people accountable to the KPIs that you've set up and all that.
yeah, the first and foremost thing is you got to get clear on what gives you energy in your business. We call it the guiding genius in our program, breakaway program, but the guiding genius is what you're wired to do.
Mm,
And so I couple that with an exercise I learned from EOS, is that it's this delegate and elevate, and it's a 4-quadrant box to where
yeah.
you identify the things you love and are great at, those things you like and are good at, and that's really more in your guiding genius, especially the love and great at. And then
Mm,
on the bottom side of this quadrant are those things, the box where those things are you don't like but are good at.
hmm
And then the last box is those things you don't like and are not good at.
mm,
Those are the things that you have to start looking at and delegating, and circle 2 or 3 things in each one of those boxes, and then focus on delegation on whether it's, and at first your delegation doesn't need to be to a person. It could be to a process, could be to a technology.
mm,
How do I automate these things? How do I use AI better before you even start thinking about people? Start thinking about how to make those things easier. I
mm.
also love the principle of the replacement ladder,
Okay.
where usually entrepreneurs, visionaries, they need to start replacing themselves with administrative tasks,
Sure.
right? And so those administrative tasks would be things that really drain their energy, that they
Yeah.
shouldn't be doing in the business, and really looking at their value. I mean, right now I look at my value and I say, man, I shouldn't be doing any of these things in my business because I'm worth whatever $100, and if whatever that value you put on yourself,
Sure.
that any task that I could pay someone else far less, I should be offloading to. And so the first hire I tell home care owners to really look at is an executive assistant. Like, don't start hiring leadership necessarily. Start with your executive assistant to get those administrative tasks off. You're not cash flow poor with an executive assistant. There's various ways to do it. Our friend Regina, she does a great job
Sure.
with executive assistants. But whatever your path is, and or if you want someone local, but that's usually the first when it comes to the replacement ladder. Think of a ladder and say, okay, administrative tasks, operations, marketing, maybe sales, and then leadership.
Sure.
You start replacing yourself in that order. That's usually a good way, or something I learned the hard way. Frankly, I
Yeah.
would start with leadership, and I would go. I just, yeah, I really messed up the cash flow in some of my businesses early on because I wanted those leaders so fast, and
Sure.
I should have just started with an executive assistant. At the Breakaway 365, in this business, I started with Megan, who's been with me for a few years now,
Yeah.
and that was a great start. And that's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it strikes me that like if you're encouraging people to go with an executive assistant first instead of building out like their C-suite leadership team, that executive assistant is a fulcrum in the business that allows you to apply the same amount of force you had been, but to get a disproportionately larger return than even just throwing another executive at the problem. It's also you know, I think executives, if there's not enough room and there's not enough structure and there's not enough kind of like infrastructure in the business for them to be effective, run the risk of getting frustrated and burning out, all that kind of stuff. But somebody who can take all of the kind of chaos of the day to day and the administrative tasks and line those up so that you can execute effectively is, a huge investment in the business.
For sure.
Okay, great. I want to move to something now where we talk about something you see as overrated in the home care industry. People think it's really great. You think it's nowhere near as good as it's cracked up to be.
Yeah, and this is going to be a little controversial, but I think that putting the label on turnover as all turnover is bad, right? Is that we
Mm,
have this real negative connotation to turnover. I don't care how good you are at hiring, you're going to make some bad hires. And you're gonna mess up, and the better that you fail fast and figure that out and realize that some turnover is good, and that you always have to be aware of that, or be willing to let the wrong people go. And so I think we have put such a negative connotation on it in the industry that and I was part of the problem years ago. I was like shouting from the rooftops when I was at Home Care Pulse, but over time and through my journey with positive psychology, I've realized that it's a little overrated, and that we have to keep it in alignment. Again, I don't, and the other thing that's overrated I was about to say is balance.
yeah.
um, a balanced life, a balanced between your home care business and your personal life. There's no such thing as balance. Balance is equal parts, right? Equal
Yeah.
weights, and that's never going to happen in life. It puts us in depression, anxiety. All of it causes so many things. It causes what Dan Sullivan calls the gap. Just gets us into this real negative mindset. I love the term alignment.
Yeah.
Right? Alignment is like, I might be 70% in my business right now, but as long as I've aligned it well with my personal life, so that I'm not that always on leader at home as well, or home care leader when I'm home. That's alignment, right? Is that we're alignment's this way. Balance is like trying to get balance. This is crazy, but this is more real.
Yeah. I have a metaphor that I'm not qualified to share, but also that nobody on this podcast is going to resonate with. So I'm going to share it anyways, which is I go to the gym. I go to a bodybuilding gym.
Oh,
And
nice. Yeah.
as you know, you've seen me in person. People have seen me on
Yeah.
the screen. I'm certainly very far from a bodybuilder, but they've got great equipment. They have plenty of squat racks. I like squats because I want to be able to live in my body for a long time and kind of like it.
Yeah.
And deadlifts are exercise where often you'll see people get the weightlifting belt there and be ready to go. And there's kind of all this like, you know, talk and technique around deadlifts. That's really important to do because there's people who are pulling unbelievable amounts of weight. The weightlifters will appreciate this. I did 4 sets of 8 at 185 yesterday, which is not a lot of weight for real deadlifters out
Mm-hmm.
there. But anyways, there's these people that I follow and they talk about, there's this real anxiety about you got to keep your back totally straight when you're deadlifting or else you
Mm-hmm.
risk injuries and like discs and, I don't want to mess up your back. But the thing that they talk about is like, look, all the time we lift stuff and round our spine and have, the ability to be much more flexible. And so all of this rigidity around technique and stuff, while it's got its place, the important thing is that you're not putting the wrong kind of force on there, but you're still able to be flexible. You're not this totally rigid,
Mm.
upright military posture all the time. And that's kind of what I
Yeah.
hear in you talking about the difference between balance and alignment is you've got to be able to flex. There's going to be seasons of your life where it's crazy busy at work, and there's going to be seasons of your life where you go away from your business for 8 weeks and you come back and you found out that it's grown.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, or that it's not, right? I mean, I've
Yeah.
had that as well, as where, I mean, involved in a few businesses that I mean, the thing is that when you're aligned, when challenges happen, you're not going off path too far, right? Is
Yeah.
you're figuring it out pretty darn quick
Mm.
when you're aligned. When you're balanced and you throw out of balance, getting that back to balance is, again, not even possible in most
Yeah.
cases.
I like that idea of like an early warning system for when you're coming out of balance or out of alignment. What are like some of the techniques or kind of thought exercises you've developed for like detecting early? Because I think the challenge is we wake up one day and we realize that a part of our business we've not been paying attention to is on fire and has been for a
Mhm.
while. And so how do you kind of counteract that and make sure that stuff is not getting out of alignment without you being aware of it pretty quickly?
I'm like when people say that they're humble, they're usually not. So I'm not
That's
super
right.
humble, but humility has like when I have been or I've tried to be, um, and that creates self-awareness, right? Is that when we're humble, we're self-aware as far as what our blind spots are.
Yeah.
And when I've been self-aware of those blind spots and I got clear on the blind spots, and I typically do that in the quiet moments, right? Is that journaling has been a go-to for me.
Yeah.
I write about it in my book, but I still can't say that I'm like the ninja of meditation yet, right? Is
Sure.
I still struggle. I have a little bit of ADHD going on in
Yeah.
this brain. And so and that's true. I actually struggle with that, have for many years. And so the focus is tough. So when I'm out in nature or when I'm out journaling, I have a great situation where I live. I walk out into nature
Yeah.
pretty quick, pretty easily, and that it creates like when I'm getting those still moments and I really evaluate the business. And I always look at like an exercise that I go through is like what's working,
Yep.
what's not working, what needs to be improved, and we use this keep communications process to kind of dial this all in. But I call it how do you envision the way envision what's possible after what's working, what's not working, envision the way what's possible, and then engineer the way forward. Like now that I know what's possible, how do I engineer the way forward? It's an acronym. It's a KEEP
Yeah.
acronym, and know what's working, envision what's possible, and then engineer the way forward. And then the last one is purpose-driven action. Is like, okay, now how do I take action on these thoughts and ideas? Um, and the other thing is, I just mentioned it earlier, and where I've made some of my biggest mistakes is when I've made decisions in a vacuum, meaning I have been on my own.
Yeah.
I've said, this is where we need to go. I made a pretty significant mistake halfway through my journey at Home Care Pulse that negatively impacted many of our relationships with our large franchisor partners.
Sure.
that I made in a vacuum, that I said, this is what we need to do. And I kind of came down. This is 2013, 2014. We had to pivot, but not after a lot of damage had been done.
Mm.
And it took some, because I mean, when you're in your own head and you're not getting out of that, or people aren't helping you get out of that, you're not humble enough to listen to others, then usually you can't make those changes. Usually you're that humility is not the driving force there, and usually you're not self-aware.
Mm.
You're just kind of in your own head. And so again, going back to answering the question in full is, I mean, humility and self-awareness has been the key things. Like when I can really get honest with
Yeah.
myself, like,
Yeah.
is this really working? Or am I so like in the sunk cost bias? Are you familiar with that term?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Where I've invested all this time, energy, people, and it's not working. And we keep trying it because we've made all this investment into it. And at some point you got to learn from your mistake.
Yeah. It strikes me that you're kind of like the foundational kind of secret to your success in business and the way that you coach entrepreneurs is to show up and like just be human, which is a really difficult thing to do, and to be very present in the moment, to have the kind of um, character traits that are hard won, like humility, but also the
Mhm.
like formal structure to like, okay, we're going to do this exercise on a consistent basis, because it's not enough just to have those moments of like clarity happen. You have to kind of manufacture them to one extent or
Yeah.
another. And
Yeah.
so like
That's
it's,
so true.
I asked a obviously very loaded question, which is like, how do you become self-aware? And the if I'm understanding your answer correctly, it's complicated.
Yeah, it is complicated, and it starts with humility. Like you just have to like accept that that maybe you made a mistake, maybe you messed up, maybe you made the wrong decision,
Mm,
and then also, ask for honest feedback
yeah.
from your team. Like, hey, and when you can be vulnerable to your team and own it and just say, hey, I realize now that this caused some issues and this
Yeah.
caused some problems. What I had to do with that example I shared is that I had to eat my own medicine or drink my own medicine, and it was a hard pill to swallow,
Yeah.
but eventually we pivoted. But
Yeah. Makes me think of a saying there of eat grow, which I have no idea what it means or where it comes from, but it's the fitting thing here. Tell me about something you think is underrated.
relationships, connections,
Yeah.
like why I say those are underrated is that we may think we're putting a lot of emphasis on it, but we don't really understand the impact. Like that book I mentioned earlier, The Good Life, talks about the 80 plus year old study that Harvard's done. And they basically all millions of dollars invested. I don't fault them for the study. I mean, it's great, but they came up with an answer that I think that is fairly common sense, in the sense that they said all these people over the course of their lifetime, and what created the good life for them, the eudaimonia, the happiness, joy, and so forth. And it was their relationships.
Yeah.
Those who had more deeper relationships were the happiest. And so the problem is we can go days, I mean days, without a high
Yeah.
quality connection in our home care business, because we've got scheduling, we've got fires we're putting out, we've got all these things going on, constantly going, stress, anxiety, that we're not truly making these meaningful high quality connections and being truly present. My wife is she is so good at listening and taking time for people, and not and when you are talking to my wife, you're not feeling rushed, right? She's just present. I also talk about this Dr. Rocco, in my book, where she's takes care of some of the biggest names and celebrities and so forth. I interviewed her for my book, and she doesn't have set appointments when they come in. She schedules like crazy amount of time. Like, you know how you go into a physician's office
Yep.
and you're like a number, right? You're just
Yep.
kind of going through. That's not her the way her office works. Is that she is so present with her patients. She takes less patients, but she's so present, and they pay her for it. But but she's part therapist, part doctor in the sense
Sure.
that she's just listening. And anyway, plus it feeds her soul. And so these high quality connections that in our home care business, that if we can get in the position as leaders, and it sounds so like, oh yeah, that makes sense, but are you doing it as a home care
Yeah.
leader? Are you truly taking time to talk with your team, even personally, and make those connections and make sure they feel present? Because their loyalty will deepen, their commitment to you will deepen, and their confidence will deepen.
Yeah.
And so in a sense, you're scaling your company when you're the most present as a leader. And I just think it's underrated, not in the way we think about it, but in the way we act on it,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. We're not doing it
Yeah.
for the most part.
Hmm.
Yeah. I fall
Hmm.
short of that. It's hard. It's hard. We don't prioritize it as much as we should in
Yeah.
our businesses.
Yeah, I think about things that, like anything that we're doing, we've got to validate the business case for it. We've got to build an ROI case for it and all that kind of stuff. And the straightest line to ROI may not be the most impactful result that
Yeah.
people see from it. And so there's stuff that like directly impacts revenue. There's stuff that directly impacts the number and quality of caregivers that we have on the team.
Yeah.
And something that you can't draw a line from this action taking place to the health of the business is being present with your scheduler or your recruiter or your HR manager to check in with them and see how they're doing. But I think, the folks that I know whose leadership I really appreciate are those people who, even though I know that they're super busy and they've got a million things
Yeah.
that they could be doing, make time to hang out with their people, to spend time with their people without an agenda, and instead understand and hear how they're doing and what they can do to better serve those individuals.
Well, yeah, and there is information out there like at Activated Insights now, but with Home Care Pulse, we track this to where if you think about when you're doing a satisfaction survey and the number one outcome question, like outcome based question, is how likely that to recommend services. Is the
Yeah.
net promoters question, right? That we know of. We found that the other question that correlated the most with the score of the highly recommend question was the relationship between a care professional and their supervisor. And so when
Hmm.
the supervisor did not have a good relationship with them, they're more likely not to recommend employment,
Yeah.
right, to another person. And so that tells me how important it is that we those relationships, not talking down, we call it partnership in our breakaway program, is you've got to create a partnership with your office team as well as your care professional so they truly feel like they're partners in the business, even though they may not have equity, but they feel
Right.
like there's a partnership there and that you really have their back,
Yeah.
is important. And there's so many science-backed concepts that we teach in our program that support how to more intentionally go about your relationships in your business.
Mm. And this kind of comes back to, why is turnover this kind of overblown metric that everybody's myopically paying attention to, instead of this kind of more holistic question of how do we build a great team of caregivers who think of us as their primary employer and their employer of choice, and they work really
Yes.
well with us, which is what people are trying to get at, because their best caregivers are the folks who've been there for 2 or 3 or 4 years and they never call out and they're always consistent and they do their stuff. But like, they've been around for that long because they're that kind of caregiver, and
Yeah.
because you've gotten lucky in a whole bunch of ways. And so I think like to call it only turnover is focusing on, yeah, it leads back into, well, all we need to do is pay more, or is, reward more. And it's like, no, it's way more complicated than that. You've got to build relationships with these people at scale. Your
Early.
supervisor, yeah,
Like
early.
really early. Like you got to jump on that because that's 90-day window. That's something we discovered years
Yep.
ago in doing the benchmarking study, is that turnover happens quickly.
Yeah.
And the underrated one is retention.
Yeah.
That's being more curious about why people stay than why they
Sure.
leave is key. We get so fixated again on turnover and why they're leaving, and we're not really dialed in on, okay, why are they staying?
Yep.
And especially your top talent, right?
Yep.
Is why will they stay?
Yep.
If they're not staying at all, that's maybe a different
Sure. Yeah.
question, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Much bigger than pay and benefits and stuff. We've got to create great places to work. And like
yeah,
candidly, that's super hard to do in home care because
yeah,
it's a hard business to make feel like they're a part of and feel a sense of belonging because it's so distributed. And there's the frontline staff to the office staff is such a huge ratio. There are so many things that make it challenging, but there's people who are also excelling in this area as well.
yeah, yeah. Oh, there are, but they are what I would call the blue ocean experts. I'm a blue ocean strategy certified, and blue ocean is like those people when it comes to the retention, they've created these unique cultures where they don't have competition when it comes to retention.
Yeah.
That they just have their own special culture, and everyone else is in this red ocean of bloody waters or whatever that they're just caught in doing the same things, not stepping outside the box, not creating their own unique culture that's important to them. Yeah, and so that's again something that I'm so passionate about is like the keeping culture model that we talk about a lot in our program that we've created there. It's not a one size fits all. Like your
Yeah. Sure.
culture has to be unique to you. Your core
Yep.
values are different. Your guiding truths are different, all those things. And so your culture is different.
Yeah.
So
Well, and I think this comes back to authenticity. And I think caregivers uniquely, given, this is painting with a really broad brush, but for the folks who are living very like paycheck to paycheck and are very economically fragile, I think folks in that who've grown up in that life have a very finely tuned sense of intuition towards any kind of duplicitousness or inauthenticity or anything that doesn't feel real.
yeah.
And I think really like bringing yourself, not who you think you're supposed to be, but bringing who you are and the kind of stuff that you like, gives you the ability to define your authentic culture, which I think like
hmm
by definition is going to be differentiated.
Yeah, and I think it starts with being curious with early on about them, asking them. We
Yeah.
have this whole process that I mentioned guiding truths to where home care agencies should be spending time right out of the gate with these care professionals and helping them identify their own personal purpose. Again, I call them guiding truths. And by doing that, by investing in them and asking them the questions, we actually have an AI tool that helps do that, where they answer questions and it creates this guiding truth statement for the care professional. Well, you invest that kind of time and put them as the priority,
Yeah.
they right out of the gate, they'll never forget you, and
Yeah.
and they'll be more loyal right out of the gate. So again, it's that early on investment, and then continually, like if you don't continue that and you don't continue investing in them, we hear this all the time. But how often is it truly authentic? Are we truly curious about them? Um, Realizing they have lives outside of work that sometimes are really heavy, really
Mm.
tough.
Mm.
Their mom might have cancer. They may have special needs kids. They may have laid on all their car payments. All those things, right? That maybe we don't deal with
Yeah.
because maybe financially we're not in the same situation as them. And so being very mindful of that and getting to know them, and maybe even some of the things they're going through, I think is puts some perspective and helps them at least feel like they belong and that you care. Belonging is so important for these care professionals.
Yeah.
It's an emotional job. They don't feel like they belong.
Yeah.
They're going to go find somewhere else where they will feel that.
Yeah. All right, let's transition
Yeah.
to, we talked about a big mistake that you made in your business. What's a little mistake that you see home care owners make all the time? And if they quit, it'd make their lives or their businesses like 10 times better.
This ties into like the biggest mistake, but the lack of proper delegation, is that we usually abdicate our responsibilities. So, and that can turn into big mistakes if you're not careful, if you consistently do this. But abdication is when we just say, "Go do it." I want you to decrease turnover by this or increase retention by this, whatever it
Yeah.
is, or it might be a project and you're not giving a great vision for that project. And so I love the 10-80-10 rule of
Mm.
delegation where the first 10% is the vision you're giving them for what you want
Yep.
out of this. And then the 80%, there's a great book called Who Not How by Dan Sullivan. He's my actual coach and mentor. But he wrote this great book, Who Not How, with Ben Hardy. And it's all about the who's you hire, right? Let them figure out the how.
Mm.
And so if you really trust your team, give them the vision. And especially, I mean, you want to make sure that they are capable of doing the job, but give them the vision, let them figure out the 80% on how to get it done, and then come back the last 10%. And then, was it done right? Was it done according to my liking and so forth? And that has changed the way I delegate when I
Mm.
think about, okay, what do I need to do to create the vision of what done looks like with this project, with this task, whatever it might be. And then people will surprise you when you create that kind of vision for them, and the autonomy they feel,
Mm.
the little mistakes we make, and this has to do with delegation, especially as leaders. To me, the little mistakes are in the when we pull autonomy out of our business,
Mm.
meaning we're not giving team autonomy. We're like what I did early on in my journey is I was robbing people of opportunity to learn because I wanted to control the outcome.
Mm.
And so that 80%, that 10-80-10 rule of delegation or art of delegation, John
Yeah.
Maxwell, that's where I learned it, um, is that that first 10% is key to the how, and then they'll figure out how to do it and get it done,
Yeah.
sometimes better than you ever thought possible. And then, of course, coming back, giving them feedback. Now, with some projects, it might be 20-60-20, right? But the
Sure.
principle is give them the vision and they'll get it done. And I think we make that mistake constantly as business owners, is that we're indecisive with our decisions. We don't delegate in our decisions. We don't bring people into those decisions. I mean, so.
That's good. Okay, well, we talked about a lot of mistakes that were made, but I like to end every episode on a high note. So tell me about something recently in your business that's happened that you're really proud of.
So every once in a while, I'll join coaching calls with our clients. I have coaches in the breakaway
Yep.
program, and then I connect on a monthly basis with the entire group and so forth. But I like to connect on these coaching calls that we do twice a month with our members. We have an exceptional team of coaches. So I jumped on one of the calls with a member just last few days, and it was such a reminder of the impact and transformation when people um, follow the process, but also um, just a reminder of my why and my own purpose and the
Yeah.
impact that I'm trying to make in the home care space, is that it's not all about revenue. It's not all
Hmm.
about, their business that way. It's about time. And to hear these, these owners express how much they have more time, more
Mm.
energy, to do what they love and do what they want to do. They've only been in the program for about 4 months,
Yeah.
but that's a big win for me when I hear those stories, and we're hearing them quite a bit. Is that they're really under when they use the science rather
Mm.
than anecdotal stuff. They're using real science to help make these transformations and these changes. It makes a huge difference. And to see, like, like when you see them at the beginning and you just see the progress. I mean, I just get giddy about it because
Yeah.
it's like there's no amount of investment, I guess, that can compensate for that kind of outcome. Like
Yeah.
when you see they're truly happy, then I'd almost pay anything for that. But
Yeah.
they they've come a long way. And so we see that all the time. That's a recent win that I can think of the top of my head, is just seeing the impact.
Yeah, that's great. Well, before we get out of here, what do you want to plug?
So Breakaway 365, it's the premier, guess you could say premier high-end coaching program for home care entrepreneurs. We just want humble-minded people who are ready to change. Size is not necessarily the deciding factor. We have companies that, from $1 million to 30 plus million, that are in the program. And so if you're really ready for we call it, the end result is creating a life of greater abundance, but really we start with helping you decrease your stress, anxiety, burnout with your home care business, and really help you elevate into levels that maybe you never thought possible. So,
and that's breakaway365.com. We've got that in the show notes as well. Aaron, this has been really fun. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Today. I appreciate the opportunity. It's been good. Great questions.
On behalf of the team here at Zengage, thanks for listening to the show. We'll be back next week with another episode, so be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts on Spotify or Apple or YouTube. Leave us a rating while you're there. It helps other people find the show. If you have comments on the show, drop me a line, david@zengage.com. Would love to hear from you, chat with you there.